Welcome back to today's Explainer, everyone. Today, we're exploring a historical concept that honestly applies just as much to our personal, everyday lives as it does to world history. We're talking about the absolute power of setting boundaries. I mean, think about it. Drawing a literal line in the sand and telling the biggest, most aggressive powers in the world, hey, do not cross this. It takes incredible courage, right? Well, that is exactly what a very young, still developing United States did on the global stage.
Okay, let's dive into this. Before we get into all the historical dates, the presidents, and the complex geopolitical strategies, I want you to consider Proverbs 22:28. Do not move an ancient boundary stone set up by your ancestors. Now, back in ancient times, boundary stones were these massive physical markers that established exactly where one person's property ended and another's began. Moving them? That was a serious violation of trust and law. Today, we're looking at a time in history when the United States set up a giant, invisible boundary stone for an entire hemisphere.
So, here's our roadmap for today. 1. A young nation grows bold. 2. The Monroe Doctrine explained. 3. Protecting Latin America. 4. How is it enforced? And finally, 5. Education, morality, and boundaries.
Starting with Section 1. A young nation grows bold.
To truly understand the sheer audacity of what the United States did in the 1820s, we have to look at the country's mindset at that specific time. They certainly weren't a global superpower yet, right? They were still this grand experiment in democracy. But look at how quickly things escalated. In 1812, the young U.S. found itself back in a major conflict with Great Britain, arguably the most powerful empire on Earth. By the time that war ended in 1815, well, it was essentially a military draw. But for the Americans, just surviving a second grueling round with the British sparked a massive surge of national pride. They realized they could hold their own. And that undeniable confidence is exactly what paved the way for 1823, when they asserted themselves in world affairs like never before.
Moving on to Section 2. The Monroe Doctrine explained.
So, the crucial point is, this is the pivotal moment where American confidence translates into a massive shift in global politics. Get ready, because this is where the United States officially draws that line in the sand. In 1823, President James Monroe delivered a very specific message to Congress, declaring that the Western Hemisphere, meaning all of North and South America, was entirely closed to any future European colonization. Imagine hanging a giant "Keep Out" sign over half the globe. He essentially told the ancient empires of Europe that the Americas were now definitively a U.S. sphere of influence. Their empire-building days on this side of the Atlantic? Officially over.
And this brilliantly illustrates a total paradigm shift. The old way of the world was that European powers felt they could just freely sail over and colonize the Americas wherever and whenever they saw fit. It was treated like a total free-for-all. But the new way, introduced by this doctrine, stated crystal clearly that any European interference was now viewed as a direct, hostile threat to U.S. security. It was a completely unprecedented declaration that the American backyard was strictly off-limits.
Which brings us to Section 3, Protecting Latin American Independence. You see, the Monroe Doctrine wasn't just about the United States protecting its own immediate borders. It was deeply connected to the political earthquakes happening with its neighbors directly south. The doctrine functioned basically as a giant protective shield over the entire hemisphere. At this exact time in history, several Latin American countries had just fought incredibly hard to win their own independence from European empires like Spain and Portugal. The U.S. wanted to support these newly independent fellow republics. So, by issuing the Monroe Doctrine, the U.S. actively discouraged those European powers from swooping right back in to reconquer that lost territory. It established a protective Western Hemisphere, giving these young, fragile nations a real fighting chance to grow without the constant shadow of European empires hovering over them.
Now for Section 4. How was it enforced?
Okay, this is where our history lesson gets a much-needed reality check. A bold declaration is really just empty words on a piece of paper unless you actually have the strength to back it up, right? So, wait, did the U.S. actually have the military power to enforce this? The country was literally just a few decades old. They had a small army, a tiny navy. Yet, they were telling the heavily armed, globe-spanning empires of Europe to stay away from an entire half of the planet. Did they really have the ships, the cannons, and the soldiers to stop Spain, France, or Russia if those empires decided to simply laugh and ignore President Monroe?
Well, here is the surprising historical twist. The honest truth is, no. The U.S. absolutely lacked the muscle to enforce this on their own. But they didn't actually have to. Great Britain's Navy ended up indirectly enforcing it for them. You think Britain had recently established some highly profitable trade routes with these newly independent Latin American countries, and Britain certainly didn't want Spain or France interfering with their profits. So the British Royal Navy, which was unquestionably the most powerful naval force on the oceans at the time, effectively served as the heavy muscle that kept the rest of Europe away. Because of that unspoken British backing, Monroe's words suddenly held tremendous weight and were allowed to become a permanent cornerstone of American foreign policy for decades to come. Let's move to Section 5 and see how this builds education, morality, and boundaries.
We've spent this entire explainer looking at how a nation drew historical, geopolitical boundary stones in the sand to protect itself. But setting up strong boundaries isn't just for countries and governments, right? It's absolutely crucial for us as individuals to protect our own minds and futures. Here at Heroes Mart Academy, our Godly Learners series philosophy is built on 3 key steps. Step 1, gain education. Yes, it is wonderful to be smart, to learn your history, and to deeply understand the world. But step 2 is where your personal boundary stone comes in. Apply biblical morality. Because quite frankly, education without morality will ultimately hurt you. I mean, what is the point of being incredibly smart if you don't have firm moral boundaries in place to stop you from making destructive choices? Just like the Monroe Doctrine acted as a shield to protect a hemisphere, combining your education with strong moral boundaries protects your life from choices that hurt.
And this brings us right back to the amazing promise found in Romans 8:6-7. It literally promises true peace of mind to everyone who keeps their mind spiritual. When you set up that spiritual boundary stone in your own life, allowing God's word to guide your highly educated mind, you achieve this incredible, lasting peace. That is exactly what we experience, and it's what we want for you. Just as a young nation needed firm boundaries to feel secure and at peace in a chaotic world, our minds and our hearts desperately need the moral boundary stones of a spiritually guided education to find ultimate peace. To wrap up today's explainer, I want to leave you with a deeply thought-provoking question to reflect on for your homework. By setting these boundaries, did the Monroe Doctrine make the U.S. more respected or more feared on the world stage? I really want you to think deeply about the true, lasting impact of drawing bold lines in the sand, both in the pages of history and in the story of your own life. Thank you so much for joining me today. Keep learning, stay curious, and always keep setting those positive boundaries.